This is the Daily Tech News for Friday, January 24th, 2025. We tell you what you need to know, follow up on the context of those stories, and try to help each other understand. Today, Kathy Gellis talks to us about the implications of the U.S. Supreme Court decision to uphold the ban on the distribution of TikTok. Also got your emails, but let's start with what you need to know with the big story. We told you 2025 would be the year of agentic AI. OpenAI just made a splash by announcing an agent called Operator. It's OpenAI's take on an agent that can surf the web for you, similar to Anthropic's Computer Use or Google's Project Mariner. Operator uses OpenAI's computer vision models. So it just interprets screenshots of what's happening on your screen, combines those with its reasoning models. So it does some iteration to determine what steps it needs to carry out. OpenAI is calling that CUA, for computer using agent, very similar to computer use from Anthropic, if you ask me. Operator appears in a small window, so it's going to pop up. It'll have its own browser. You can continue to browse while it's doing its thing, but you'll be able to see what it's doing, and it will explain what it's doing as it goes along. OpenAI demonstrated it by looking up and making a restaurant reservation, or having it do that, I guess, as well as having it order some groceries from an image of a handwritten shopping list. OpenAI said it worked with several websites, including Instacart, OpenTable, Uber, and StubHub to make sure that it worked well with their interfaces, but that means it might not work perfectly on all sites. In fact, OpenAI is pretty transparent about this. It has a 40% success rate at unfamiliar complex text editing, according to OpenAI. And the company warned that it's not reliable at, quote, creating detailed slideshows, managing intricate calendar systems, or interacting with highly customized or non-standard web interfaces. There's also a rate limit. Yeah, it'll slow down after a while if you're using it a lot. There's an overall daily usage limit. OpenAI didn't share specific numbers about that. They're probably adjusting it as they go along to see how many people are going to use it. Operator will also turn down certain tasks. So if you ask it to do some banking for you, it will try to say no. It'll try. Remember, this is a large language model. It could go rogue, but they're saying most of the time it should say no. It's not going to send email. It's not going to delete calendar events. It's not going to do anything that OpenAI thinks could be harmful. It will also require your input if you're doing something like authenticating, entering a password, providing payment information, or, and this one's going to be disappointing for those of you who are tired of identifying buses and stoplights, filling out a CAPTCHA. The CAPTCHA is supposed to catch AIs, so it's going to make you, the human, do the CAPTCHAs. You can also step in and interrupt it if you don't like what it's doing. You can say, stop, let me take over. It has systems to detect prompt injection attacks. So this is something malicious websites could try to set up to try to hijack Operator and make it do things for it. OpenAI says it detected all but one attempt at prompt injection in internal testing. And if you're concerned about privacy, I know who's concerned about privacy these days, but OpenAI lets you opt out of having your screenshots used for training. You can also choose to delete all of Operator's history and have it log out of all sites that it has logged into simultaneously. A few security folks recommend that if you use this at all, you do that after each session. Don't let anything stay on OpenAI's cloud, not because they don't trust OpenAI, but that's just authenticated sessions that are out there that you're not in control of. So if you want to be absolutely safe, you want to rid that stuff. That does take away some of the usefulness of ongoing sessions. Operator is available in research preview right now. If you are a selected subscriber who is paying the $200 a month ChatGPT Pro service. So not a lot of people using it yet. They're going to scale it up. OpenAI says it'll eventually make it available to all ChatGPT users, including the people on the $20 a month and the free tiers. It will introduce other types of agents later this year. This is just a web browsing one. They say they got more. And CEO Sam Altman did say that Europe will unfortunately take a while. So coming to everybody, but you're apparently last in line. A couple of slightly related stories here, too. A coalition of book publishers in India has brought the most recent copyright lawsuit against OpenAI related to what data it uses to train its models. This is not far from the first, and it probably won't be the last. Also, if you recall us mentioning earlier this week, the new R1 model of DeepSeek. DeepSeek's available for free. So it's a much cheaper reasoning model, but people say it's comparable to OpenAI's O1 in performance. Sherwood notes that it appears to adhere to China's speech restrictions. So yeah, it's free, but it failed when prompted for information related to Tiananmen Square, for example. It just said, I don't know how to respond to that. When it was asked about Uyghurs, and one of the things you can do with reasoning models is see how it comes to its answer. The log showing how it came to its answer provided a government-aligned response. It said, I need to provide a government-aligned response, and also noted that it can't reference external reports critical of China. So, I don't know. It's free. You might still want to use it for certain things, but you want to be aware of that. If you're wondering, wait, Tom didn't introduce his co-host. No co-host today, just me. I kind of wanted to sit with you after doing this for 2 weeks and chat with you directly. I'll be asking for your feedback a little later on, but, just you and me today. And you are the person who makes this possible. Big thanks to Ali Sanjabi, AB Puppy, Dale Mulcahy, my whiskey concierge, and brand new patron, Malcolm. Everybody welcome Malcolm. Thank you, Malcolm. You can become a patron yourself. Go to patreon.com/DTNS. There's more we need to know today. Let's get to the briefs. The race for Indian manufacturing is heating up. Pay attention to these because it's going to relate to something I'm going to tell you a little later as well. India's Tata Electronics has acquired a 60% stake in Pegatron's Indian business. Now, Pegatron is a Taiwan-based company, but it operates 3 production plants in India that assemble iPhones for Apple. Tata also assembles iPhones in India, so getting a stake in Pegatron is going to expand its ability to make iPhones for Apple. Bloomberg sources say Reliance, a juggernaut in India, is buying a boatload of NVIDIA chips to build a 3-gigawatt data center in Jamnagar. That would make it the largest capacity data center yet built in India, and honestly, one of the larger ones worldwide. So we've got more manufacturing coming to India, more data centers coming to India, and India's making its own chip. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, India's Minister for Railways, Communications, Electronics, and Information Technology, wow, that's a mouthful of a title, that minister announced the first domestically manufactured semiconductor chips on a 28-nanometer process. So they're just a step behind China, and they're not being impeded by the U.S. in their pursuit of this, and that chip should launch sometime this year. Sony will no longer produce recordable Blu-ray mini disc and MD data discs. They're also not going to produce mini DV cassettes anymore. They say the sales of all of these have been poor. This is widely misunderstood as they're not making Blu-ray discs anymore. They're still making movies on Blu-ray discs. The company is just not making the recordable type. Recordable Blu-ray discs are still being made by other companies. Verbatim makes them. There are a few others that make them. However, mini discs are going to be hard to find. Sony was making almost all of them. So if you're a mini disc fan, and I know there is one of you, I'm sorry for your loss. Spider-Man. Wired has an article worth reading about scientists from Tufts University who have made a sticky web-like substance similar to something Spider-Man might use. By accident, the scientists found that combining silk from a silkworm with dopamine and acetone changed a reservoir of flexible liquid into a fiber that could attach to objects. You've got to read the story. Go check it out at wired.com. The UK Competition and Markets Authority announced Friday that Google has agreed to improve its process for detecting and removing fake reviews. So if a business is found to be engaging in the practice of paying people to review itself or paying people to drag down a competitor, that business will lose the ability to receive new reviews, and all existing reviews will be deleted for at least 6 months. That's not going to help your business. Further violations could lead to a warning being placed on the listing that tells everybody don't believe their reviews. And if they keep violating, eventually they'll be banned from having a listing altogether. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg posted Friday that the company plans to spend between $60 and $80 billion on capital expenditures this year, mostly for data centers and the AI development team. They are telling their stockholders, we're going to spend a lot of money to catch up. That would about double what Meta spent on CapEx in 2024. I found this interesting in a Bloomberg article about why Apple and Google have continued to block TikTok from being listed in their U.S. stores, while Oracle appears to continue to provide services to the company. If you're like, hold on, I'm a little confused. The law said you can't distribute the app, so that's why Apple and Google have not listed it in their U.S. store, or you can't be a web host. You can't provide other kinds of services like file storage. It's a little vague on how it applies, but it could apply to Oracle, which hosts data for TikTok in the United States. Bloomberg noted that Oracle also hosts data for TikTok in the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region. So Bloomberg didn't say this, but I looked at that and thought it's not impossible that Oracle could use that to somehow indemnify itself from lawsuits over violating the current law that prohibits U.S. hosting services of TikTok. They could maybe use those European data centers to say, we're not hosting it in China, but we're providing the service through a non-U.S. entity. I don't know, but it's possible. And just as a reminder, if you're like, wait a minute, I thought the ban was lifted, the president issued an executive order telling the attorney general not to enforce the law for 75 days, but the law is still in effect. So if that order is challenged in court and found to not protect you from the consequences of violating the law, you could still have to pay a fine. Apple was supposed to launch the next generation of CarPlay in 2024. It has not remarked on missing that deadline until now, January 24th, 24 days into 2025. Apple says, oh, we won't be shipping it in 2024. Actually, that's not what they said. Here's what they said. We continue to work closely with several automakers, enabling them to showcase their unique brand and visual design philosophies in the next generation of CarPlay. They did not give an updated timeline. They also removed the 2024 timeline from their website finally. So who knows when we'll get it, but they say, hey, we're still working on it. Threads added a few features to its microblogging service. You can now schedule a post to go up later. So that's nice. Scheduling of posts is something people wanted. You can also see metrics for individual posts in your Insights dashboard. And a new feature coming soon called Markup will let you use drawing tools to draw on a post that you're resharing. So you can use a highlighter to circle parts, stuff like that. Another new feature coming is ads. Advertising from a few brands will begin to show up for Threads users in Japan and the United States as a test. Oh, yay. All right, finally, a couple articles you may want to look for in our show notes. High Capacity, that's the name of the website, has a write-up of how China's expertise in manufacturing EVs, batteries, LiDAR, drones, robotics, and smartphones work together to strengthen what China can do. They have built up something that reinforces itself. That makes it harder for other regions to compete. So when we're talking about India building up its manufacturing, it's not as easy to catch up with China because they have the supply, because they make a lot of this stuff. They have strong domestic demand. So if somebody cuts them off internationally, they can still sell a lot and make money domestically. They have technical knowledge on manufacturing that goes back decades now, and they have scale because they have a lot of these kinds of companies. In fact, The Economist was doing a really interesting podcast about Shein and how Shein started because you had all these places in China that could mass produce cheap clothing quickly in a way that no other region can. And that's how Shein got started. Anyway, along with that article, the other one I want to point out is Rest of World, noting that Chinese social media apps are succeeding because of their emphasis on shopping over advertising. U.S. social media apps focus on advertising and making money off of advertising. TikTok and others in China focus on selling you things, having you do a shopping experience. There's really good analysis of why that changes how the algorithms work and why that may be more enjoyable for you as a user. Noting, though, that according to market intelligence company SimilarWeb, RedNote's daily active users in the U.S. declined by 54% on Monday. So even though RedNote, a Chinese social media app, got a lot of uptake, it doesn't seem to be as sticky. Although, 54% means that 46% are still using it. All right, those are the essentials for today. Let's dive a little deeper into an ongoing story and follow up. A lot of people are focused on what happens to TikTok next, as we were just discussing, but there are also ramifications for other technology besides TikTok out there as a result of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision not to strike down the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act. So we found someone to help explain what kind of precedents that decision might set. I'm talking with Kathy Gellis, internet lawyer and policy advocate, also one of the contributing writers over at TechDirt, where you may have seen her things. Thanks for joining us, Kathy.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I am not a lawyer, nor did I attend the Supreme Court arguments or file an amicus brief, but you've done all three of those things. So thank you for sharing your expertise on this with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
How would you characterize this particular decision?
In short, not good. In fact, I might change that two-word answer to very bad. And I think the only bright spot is it could have been worse. I think it would have been worse if they had looked at the law and found it constitutional using strict scrutiny, which is the highest bar for a government action against free speech to have to clear. And I think the problem with the DC Circuit decision is they did use that heightened standard, looked at this law and said, using our very exacting way of thinking about this, you're fine. Which means that we don't have a very good exacting test for other sorts of government actions that might not be constitutional. So it's an improvement over the DC Circuit's decision in that it didn't trash that more exacting standard because they decided not to use it. Mm-hmm. The bad news is they needed to use it, and they didn't. They used a much lesser standard as kind of a dumping ground for, well, if we use intermediate scrutiny and then we look at it, yeah, it's fine, which is still bad because it's not fine. And there's tremendous harms to speech in a number of areas. And if all of a sudden the way they're going to not have strict scrutiny is just to use this escape valve to not give it the review that it's due, that's not good either, because it means there's no effective test for when government does stuff that acts against speech.
Yeah, as an outsider, it seemed like a fairly narrow ruling, but it sounds like you think it could still have some effects on other cases in the future, or the way the government behaves in the future. What are you concerned with in following this decision might change?
Oh, no, well, there's a number of concerns. There's certainly some practical concerns, which is they've left us with a complete mess where TikTok ended up completely unprotected, and we are now back in a realm where what happens to TikTok is something that is not happening, not unfolding in a way that the law would quite understand, and it's very, very, very messy. And when you have messes like this, where you're just seeing power plays over who can make what happen to it, that's kind of outside the rule of law, and that's not good. So we've got a practical problem, which is by leaving speech interests unprotected, now what? And the what appears to be very messy. They did say the decision was narrow, and, I think we'll fall back on that language as much as possible and really try to show this as a one-off and very aberrant. But they do have some language which is going to ricochet and show up everywhere else, where all the ways they looked at something unconstitutional and said, yeah, but what about this? Mm-hmm. That's going to come back. And people who want to do state actors who want to do unconstitutional things to speech will look at it and pull from that language. In particular, the claim that seems to have completely spooked the court, which was that there's a true national security problem with TikTok. And although I think they left that, there were two things that this law tried to do that it characterized as a national security problem. One is it slurped too much user data, and two, it moderated content in a way they also felt was problematic. And I think the court may have left to the side the rationale of they didn't like how the platform was moderating, because that has much more facial problems with the Constitution. But just on the basis of the data protection, they had issues. And it's not to say that the data protection isn't a true problem, but what constitutional scrutiny, like strict scrutiny, is supposed to require is not just that you had a compelling reason to regulate, but that you used narrowly tailored means to do your regulation so that A, you effectively solve the problem, and B, you don't have all this collateral harm on protected rights like free expression. And the court just did not apply that. They looked at, well, data protection is valid and national security is a compelling reason, and they basically stopped their inquiry there, even though they said they kept going, but they didn't really keep going. They basically stopped the inquiry there. And we're going to need data protection laws. We've already got them in states. We're going to get them in more states. We probably need a federal one because this is a real problem. But it sort of means that all sorts of garbage could be thrown on the books, including garbage that's pretextual, where the government is really trying to censor speech, but they're just wrapping it up with it's a data protection law. And one of the practical concerns is, what does that mean? Has the Supreme Court greenlit some really sloppy regulation where whether it's by accident or on purpose, we're going to have a lot of speech harms that result?
Yeah. So if I'm understanding what you're saying right, the fact that they use this lesser standard, the intermediate scrutiny, meant that they were saying content neutral law. There is a burden on speech, but the security concerns outweigh it, and we don't have to look too hard at those security concerns. Is that where the issue seems to lie?
I think that's essentially what they did. I mean, a little bit here and there around the details of how they tried to convince themselves that they were not making a mistake, but that's essentially what came out. And we're going to get more data protection laws. And I can point to, for example, the California age appropriate design law, which was nominally a privacy law, but it was about censorship. It was about age gating the internet and kids today. And you think of the children, and it was all about putting up government barriers between people and expression. But it was packaged as a privacy law. So if the Supreme Court is right here, where certain compelling reasons that are apparently content neutral, even though this one wasn't content neutral, they had to ignore an awful lot of the record, including the text of the law itself, to realize it wasn't content neutral. If they could look past that and still say it's fine, the litigation is going to be harder because a lot more laws, a lot more state actions are going to be pretextual and damaging, and that's going to be a problem to clean up.
Do you think that the fact that this was a foreign adversary act means that would be limited to foreign applications in the future, or do you think this could be applied domestically?
That will help. That will help. But one of the issues that we put in the brief that I wrote was, we phrased, the question is, what does it mean to be foreign? And we phrased it as, how American do you need to be American? Mm-hmm. And we pointed out that, there's a lot of foreign investment in a lot of our quote unquote American platforms. So do they disqualify and all of a sudden put it in the realm of it's foreign? There is a little bit more with the designation of foreign adversary, which goes beyond just being foreign. But I'm not entirely sure where I'm staring into upcoming foreign policy where we're mad at Denmark because we want Greenland, that I think anybody can start to be a foreign adversary, and some that you and I might think are foreign adversaries can all of a sudden be deemed friends. So this doesn't seem like a very principled axis that we could presume that this decision will be limited to, even though the justices may have thought it could be.
If we were to see a sign that this was, causing an issue in the future, what would it look like? What's the first sign that that TikTok case is now causing a problem?
I think that we've already probably seen the first sign, which was, can we halt this? And then TikTok was going dark, then it was undark. Mm-hmm. By the time this airs, I'm not entirely sure how dark it will be, but all of the
some shade of gray,
but everything that has happened in subsequent to this decision is a first sign that this was a mistake. Mm-hmm. But one thing I want to point out is a mechanism of this law, which is it didn't just make it that TikTok would be violating the law for not divesting itself, but it was really an example of jawboning, because what it did was put pressure on third parties and impose liability on them if they didn't cut off TikTok. So the big example is can the app show up in the App Store? And at the moment, or at least the last I checked, and who knows what the upshot will be later, it wasn't in the Google Store, it wasn't in the App Store, which is those third parties reacting to the liability pressure that they're feeling. But then there's also hosting providers, and I'm not entirely sure how expansive that might reach, but cloud services, possibly CDNs, and maybe even more. For it takes a community to provide a web service, and the regulation was built by targeting those third parties to make it that they had to say no to TikTok, and therefore if they're saying no to TikTok, there's no TikTok. So that whole construction also having been blessed, although I don't think that point was particularly litigated. It certainly wasn't litigated at the Supreme Court level, and I'm less sure about the previous level. But that's an issue unto itself. And have we just greenlit how to go after services we don't like by sticking it to the helpers? And I would notice that the Supreme Court last term said no to that sort of thing by objecting to what had happened to the NRA in New York, where people didn't like what the NRA was saying, so they went after businesses they did business with as a way of sticking it to the NRA, and the Supreme Court said, no, you don't get to do that. So, and here it is with the TikTok ban. That's exactly what they did.
Well, Kathy, thank you so much for chatting with us and helping us understand the consequences of that Supreme Court decision a little more. If people want to find out more about what you do or anything about your writing or services or anything, where should they go?
That is a lovely question. Thank you for asking. And it needs a better answer, but I do contribute to TikTok. And there's a URL that I think it's /user/Kathy that captures my posts. And cgcouncil.com is for my I Am a Lawyer website. And watch this space. I think there will be more. And I'm on Blue Sky at kathygillis.bsky.social.
Which is where we got in touch. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Exactly. The social media brings the world together. There's actually some upsides to it. Who knew?
Right. Who knew? Thanks again.
Okay. Thank you too.
If you have feedback about anything that gets brought up on the show, get in touch. Let me know what you're thinking about this new way of doing Daily Tech News Show. Our social media is at DTNS Show. I know it's 2 S's, but it makes sense if you think about it. DTNS Show. You can find that account on X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. If you're looking for video on TikTok or YouTube, you can find us at Daily Tech News Show. Now, usually, I'm going to end every episode of DTNS with some shared wisdom from people. Today, I'm the person sharing. I don't know if it's wisdom, but I'm the person sharing because I want to hear from you. We've been getting great emails from folks. This is the end of the first 2 weeks of the new format for Daily Tech News Show, and a lot of you have been kind enough to share your thoughts. Thank you for that. But I'd like to ask those of you who haven't to drop me an email. feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com. It's been going well. I've really been enjoying doing these shows with Jason and Hwin. I can't wait to get going with Rob now that he is back from his vacation in the swing of things. You've heard him on DTNS Live if you're listening to that, but he's going to be doing this as well. So let us know what you think. Let us know your thoughts. What do you like? What are you getting used to? So a lot of people have said, well, I wasn't sure, but now that I've heard it, I kind of like this and that. And now that we've been doing it, I think you can give us a better idea of what you're enjoying and what you're like, I'd like to hear more of this, or I'd like you to do that. So once again, that email address is feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com. Anyway, thank you for being with us. It was a long 6 months of planning. It was a nerve-wracking launch, especially because I decided to do it right during CES. Really would like to hear what you have to say. Feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com. All right. Big thanks to Kathy Gillis for contributing to today's show. What a wonderful talk we had. Thank you for being along. The show is made possible by you, by the patrons. The patrons are the underpinning of this. Patreon.com/DTNS. DTNS has a live version. As I said, DTNS Live. It's on YouTube and Twitch Live, or you can find it in your podcast. Just search for DTNS Live. More details on that are available at dailytechnewsshow.com. Talk to you on Monday. For real this time. This week's episodes of Daily Tech News Show Briefing were created by the following people. Host, producer, and writer Tom Merritt. Host and writer Jason Howell. Co-host Rob Dunwood. Co-host Jen Cutter. Co-host Wen Tui Dao. Producer Anthony Lemos. Producer Roger Chang. Editor Hammond Chamberlain. Editor Victor Bognot. Science correspondent Dr. Nikki Agermans. Social media producer and moderator Zoe Detterty. Our mods, Beatmaster, W. Scottus1, BioCow, Captain Kipper, Steve Guadarrama, Paul Reese, Matthew J. Stevens, a.k.a. Gadget Virtuoso, and J.D. Galloway. Mod and video hosting by Dan Christensen. Music provided by Martin Bell and Dan Luters. Art by Len Peralta. Acast ad support from Tatiana Matias. And Patreon support from Tom McNeil. Our guests this week were Kathy Gellis, Molly Wood, and Reed Albergati. And thanks to all our patrons who make the show possible.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.